Podcast, the podcast of OA. Located deep within Sector 14845 and powered by the Emerald Light of Will, the podcast of OA is your guide to the Green Lantern universe. Hosted by Lantern Myron Rumsey, the podcast of OA begins now.
Green Lantern fans, thanks for joining us. This is episode number 140 of the podcast of OA. I'm your co-host, Myron Rumsey, and I am co-hosting this show with my good friend Phil Bova. Phil, my friend, how's life treating you?
Life is good. Life is good. I got three more working days left for the end of the year, and I'll be off until August. So I'm very much looking forward to it.
You lucky dog.
Man, I'm so looking forward to it. But my wife and I, we leave on the 10th of June. We're going to Vegas for a couple weeks. Do some traveling around that area, do some hiking, looking up some national sites, and just trying to get our itinerary set.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a good time. I'm looking forward to it. I haven't been out there in decades. I mean, it's been at least over 20 years.
Wow. Well, here in the U.S., we're getting ready to celebrate Memorial Day. And for those of you who don't live in the United States that are tuning into us from other parts of the universe, Memorial Day is a holiday where we honor those who served in the military and gave their lives in the defense of our country and of life and liberty across the planet. So, for people that have lost loved ones, certainly my heart goes out to you. And I want to thank all those who have come before us and those that are over there now serving in our behalf.
Absolutely. I'll second that. And it's going to be a good time for people to get together and party. And it's everybody's big barbecue day is on Monday. So
yeah, I think there's more hot dogs and hamburgers consumed in this country on Memorial Day than any and the rest of the year combined.
I'm not surprised.
So this episode, Phil and I are going to do a couple of retro reviews, and we've got kind of a theme going on here. You know, it's DC Comics kicked off their year of the villain. So last episode we talked about the modern retelling of Black Hand's origin. So in this episode we're going to go back to 1964. And talk about Green Lantern number 29, which is when Black Hand appeared for the first time in the Silver Age. And then we're going to do a jump back to the Jeff Johns era and talk about Phil's one of his favorite villains, and that's Cyborg Superman in the one-shot Tales of the Sinestro Corps Cyborg Superman book.
Looking forward to it. Gosh, I love that book. Such a great book.
So before we kick into talking about comics, this is a continuation of JL May. It's the month-long event celebrating the 10-year anniversary of Blackest Night. And looking at the list of podcasts, and again, I'll post a link in the show notes that shows the list of podcasts and what books are covering. Right about now, we are up through Blackest Night number 5, as well as some of the other ancillary books. So in the next couple of weeks, we should be wrapping up JL May. So I'm really excited about that. That's been a really fun event. The other thing I want to talk about is, I've been talking about the World's Finest Collection Green Lantern box for a while, and the box came out recently. Phil, did you get it at all, or did you pass on it?
I passed. I didn't get it, but I've looked at some of your Instagram posts and stuff, and I've actually read about a couple other people that had some issues with their box as well, not being in great condition when they receive it. Yeah.
I did an unboxing video on YouTube, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And, when I first unboxed it, I was really kind of excited because I had gotten sent a Superman box from World's Finest Collection and was really, really excited for the Green Lantern box after I saw the quality of the contents of the Superman box. And my wife buys the Supernatural boxes. I think I mentioned that before. And everything that she's gotten in the last year or so that she's been subscribing to that, everything has been very high quality. So when the Green Lantern box was coming out, I was like, boy, this is going to be really awesome. And when I shot the video, I had some bright lights shining on me, and so I couldn't really see the detail of what I was unboxing. And then after I got done unboxing everything, and then I took some time off camera to review the different items, I was like, boy, the shirt was nice. The hat was nice. The pillow cover was nice. The bottle opener was nice, although mine was damaged. But World's Finest is replacing that one for me, so kudos to their customer service. But the vinyl figure and the USB hub were big misses. The paint job, almost universally from everybody I've talked to and have had feedback on my video about the figure, they were bad everywhere you went. The shoulder was not glued on well. It's funny because the Superman figure was pretty much all one piece except for the cape, so there were no seams in the body anywhere. And the paint job, there were a couple of minor flaws, but the Green Lantern figure had tons of areas where the paint wasn't right. I had brown facial or brown hair paint on the side of Hal's cheek, and just missing pieces here and there, chunks of paint missing. And then the USB hub, it has 3 ports in it, but even though all 3 ports work, they don't all work at the same time. So you could plug one item into any one of the 3, but if you plugged anything else in, you couldn't read any of those devices. So a problem there, and then a lot of paint missing on the handle, and then maybe a terribly missed opportunity. You would think that if you had USB power going to a mini power battery, that you'd make it light up, and it doesn't. So for those who... For those who followed, my promotion of the box, I assure you, I was expecting a lot of great things in it. And if you spent money on it and are not happy, I do apologize if I influenced you in any way in buying it. But what I would encourage you to do, and this is what I did, is I took pictures of the bottle opener and the USB hub and the figure, and I sent them to their customer support. And I heard back in about 2 business days back from them, and they offered to replace the bottle opener because they still had those in stock. They did not have the figure or the USB hub in stock anymore, but they credited me back almost half of the cost of the box. So,
well, that was really good of them. At least they did that.
Yeah. And I haven't heard them say anything publicly about the quality of it. I almost hope that they give Green Lantern a do-over, because boy, when I opened up the Superman box, there was a Superman blanket cape, there was a Daily Planet T-shirt, there was a Crypto really nice Classon large pin, there was a Daily Planet journal. What else was there in it? I can't see it all from here, but the Superman vinyl figure, and it seems to me there's 1 or 2 other items I'm missing. I just don't remember now what they were, but everything was such high quality. And this box, just for whatever reason, even though they delayed it a month, was a miss as far as I'm concerned. And I feel really bad about it. And I hope for people who got excited about it because of my enthusiasm, I hope they don't end upset with me for it. Like I said, nobody wanted it to be amazing more than I did. But
yeah, that's disappointing. That's really sad. At least customer service is taking strides to do what they can to, I guess, put out the fire. But it kind of makes you wonder who the quality control was to let it get out of the manufacturer facility like that.
Well, and it's funny because they obviously have somebody looking at it, or a team of somebody's looking at it, because they delayed the box for over a month on the quality of one of the items. And it's funny because you know how these blind boxes, they give you a card that shows you what's in the box. There's a picture of the USB hub, and it isn't the same as what you get. So the picture doesn't even the picture doesn't match. So to me, that's telling me that was the quality control item. But then with the action figure, or the vinyl figure, there's not a picture of the figure. It's a drawing of the figure. So the 2 items that were the poorest quality seem to have been maybe items that they didn't have finished ones to take pictures of for the what I guess I want to call it a spoiler card or whatever. But it seems like whatever quality control they had kind of fell out the window, and they felt like they must have had to get the product out there because they've been promising it. But boy, I'd almost rather have had them say, hey, we're really not happy with this even now. We're going to delay it even another month. I'd have been fine waiting for stuff to be really good.
That's really disappointing. That's really, really disappointing.
Yeah, it is. But anyway, we've got some comics to talk about. So why don't you and I pause for a moment, and when we come back, we're going to talk about one of your favorite characters, Cyborg Superman.
Oh, I'm so looking forward to it.
This is Razor, and you are listening to the blog of Oa. You need to keep listening, otherwise I will track you down with all of my skill, and you will feel my wrath.
everybody. Welcome back. This is Phil again with my excellent co-host, Myron. And we're here to talk about one of my all-time favorite villains, right behind Black Hand, the Cyborg Superman. Now, Myron, what are your thoughts on Cyborg Superman?
Well, it's interesting because I kind of felt when they originally did Cyborg Superman during the whole, the reign of the Superman story and all that stuff, I was kind of so-so with him, but the way that this story is written and the way that Jeff Johns reimagined him with him having this whole death wish, I thought was so amazing. It's such a neat twist on it. And to tie him in with the Manhunters it just made so much sense.
Right. And I really enjoy how the fact that he started off over there in Adventure Comics, Adventures of Superman, I think it was 466 was when he originally was originally introduced, or that was his origin story. I'm sorry. And I really liked how Johns took it to the next level because I actually own the issue, his origin story, and it wasn't as emotionally impactful as Johns' iteration of it.
Yeah, I think Jeff just really has a good strength for writing good villains. I think he has a great way of looking at the villain and making you, like Sinestro. Just take Sinestro as an example. Sinestro was a classic mustache twirling bad guy, but Jeff Johns takes it and spins it on its head a little bit, and Sinestro's not wrong with what he's trying to accomplish. It's just how he's trying to accomplish it.
Right.
And in Cyborg Superman's story, what you find in this book is you find him as almost a sympathetic character. You want him to achieve his goal because that's the only way he's going to find any peace.
Right, and it's really he carries a lot of weight on his shoulders in this issue. It felt like. But then again, I mean, you're looking at the Adventures of Superman, which came out in 1990, and writing has come a long way in the comic book industry since then, and it pulls more strings. Because I mean, I read stuff now, and sometimes I'll get an emotional tug every once in a while, but when I revisit things like this one, it really perpetuated further because I was like, wow, I didn't know he was that tragic of a character until I reread this issue, because the last time we seen Cyborg Superman was in Venditti's run a little while back. And I like when he shows up in the Lantern titles because I think he fits better as a villain in the Green Lantern universe as opposed to what he does with Superman.
Yeah, you see in this story, you see why he would have a strong dislike of Superman. But yeah, I like his interactions, especially with the Manhunters. It just makes so much sense. And Venditti used him in a different way as well that was interesting, that maybe you wouldn't think of. So,
right.
And just his story here. I mean, you find out in this story a bit more about his background, and you really do feel for the guy because he really he wants to find peace, and there's only one way for him to find peace. And yet, no matter what happens to him, he ends up coming back, not because he wants to. It's almost like it's a curse. You know what I mean?
It is. Yeah, it is. And he carries it. And a lot of it is a reflection upon his partners that died in that shuttle disaster, Jim Garrison, and then there was this other guy, Steve, and then, of course, his wife, Terry. And it makes it sad because, who out there in this world, if we lose a loved one or, if someone that we're so emotionally attached to, and a lot of times, yeah, sure, there's that aspect of we have to carry on in life, but there's also that other struggle on the other end that, I want to be with the one that I love. And in his case, he just wants to end it. He just wants to die like everybody else died. But unfortunately, the Anti-Monitor had other plans for him.
Yeah. And to kind of get to the meat of the story, it's basically told from Cyborg Superman's perspective, even though this is tied to the heart of the Sinestro Corps War storyline. But you kind of hear his background and how, he was a shuttle astronaut with a number of other people, including his wife. And there's a burst of radiation, which he says comes from Superman interacting with, I can't remember just now what it was that caused it. Do you recall?
What was it again? The what?
Well, when Cyborg Superman is retelling the story, there's a solar flare with all this energy, and he claims that it came from Superman. And
right. That was with the Eradicator. He threw the Eradicator into the sun, I think.
Yep, that's what it was. Thank you. I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
And the story takes place with him and Sinestro on their way to Earth on War World. And he's recalling this story and how the solar flare impacts them, and they all kind of die these horrifying deaths, but he can't get to that end, and he can't go on without the one that he loves, his wife. He loved her so much that he can't get over that hump. And the fact that he's tied to this technology, that it prevents him from finding his final rest. It's interesting because when you look at him and Black Hand, they're kind of cut from that same cloth, because that's what they both really want. They have some very similar goals.
They do. And the one thing that stood out in this issue as opposed to the one in Adventures is Superman doesn't even take ownership of or any kind of blame or fault for his actions. He kind of just passes. It's kind of like nihilistic of him, because he kind of just passes it off like, oh, it's not my fault. You just need to learn to deal with it. Life goes on, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's like, okay, well, you did in fact cause this event that has pretty much changed it was a life-altering thing for Hank Henshaw. And Superman just kind of brushes it off like it's no big deal. And the sad part about it is, in this issue, is like Superman has very little sympathy for him, And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of not the suits that I've kind of grown up reading and stuff. You would think that he would have some kind of sympathetic string in his body, but in this book, it doesn't play out that way. Now, reflectively, I think Jeff Johns maybe kept that out intentionally, probably to hash out Hank Henshaw's storyline to show the hatred that he has for Superman and what he caused to him and his colleagues or his friends.
Well, and the story is also told from Hank's perspective. So is that his perspective of how he takes what Superman says? Is it through a filter that's, how accurate is it? And that's what we don't know. It's neat. This particular book wasn't written by Jeff Johns. It was written by Alan Burnett.
Alan Burnett, yeah.
Yep. And Alan Burnett, for those that are big fans of the DC animated stuff, he actually wrote and co-produced Green Lantern First Flight, and he also was a writer and co-producer on Green Lantern Emerald Knights.
I think he's writing Aquaman now. I haven't got caught up on that, but I think he was over in Aquaman for a while.
He might have been. I know Kelly Sue DeConnick is writing Aquaman now.
Yeah, that's who he was. I think he was right before her.
He might have been. I'm not sure. I haven't been reading Aquaman, but Alan Burnett just retired not long ago from Warner Brothers Animation.
Interesting. That I didn't know.
Yep, and he actually co-produced The Death of Superman and Reign of Superman, and I think were his last two projects.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Interesting enough, Ethan Van Sciver was the cover artist for this issue in 2007.
Yep. He was the cover artist.
Which button?
What's that?
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say he did the exteriors, and the interiors were by Patrick Blaine, who I thought did a really nice job. He kind of kept the consistent look of Sinestro as Space Hitler.
He really did. And the interaction between Cyborg and Sinestro is kind of like haphazard. It's kind of like, it's almost like Hank Henshaw is on a mission. He doesn't care what anybody has to say. He's just basically using Sinestro as a tool for his own means.
Yeah. He's not really. He doesn't believe in Sinestro's cause necessarily. He's just along for the reward that the Anti-Monitor is going to give him, because the Anti-Monitor has promised him that he's going to give him his death that he wants. Right. And
unfortunately, he doesn't find it.
No,
and unfortunately, he doesn't find his death.
No, not at all. But yeah, it's a really tragic story, but it's neat that they kind of did this retelling of the origin a little bit, because it makes you feel for this character. It's interesting. You're not supposed to really feel anything for the villains, but I think that's what makes them more multidimensional. I think the villains, good, well-written villains, well-crafted villains, are villains who are heroes in their own story.
Well, and you and I have been reading comics for decades now, and there hasn't really. I mean, I guess you can go back to that DC had that event where it was all villains. Remember that? Oh gosh, what was that called? A few years back, they focused on all the villains for a long time. Do you remember that? Yeah.
That was where they had those really neat lenticular covers.
Yeah. Those were really cool.
What was it called? It was a DC event. Forever Evil,
right? But it seems to me like in the past, I don't know, I guess you could go 10 years, maybe longer than that, there's more of an emphasis on the villain aspect to be the antithesis of the hero. And it's nice to know that they gain a lot of the spotlight, because I mean, obviously, one can say without the villain, you wouldn't have the hero, and vice versa.
Right. And I think there's this philosophy that Jeff Johns really talked about it a lot, is in order to have the hero rise above, you've got to give them something to rise above that has meaning. So by putting some emphasis on the villain and not just making them the villain of the week. When he went back to the Silver Age, lots of times it was like, okay, what gimmick can I come up with to pose a threat to the hero? And I'll give some, nondescript character some weak motivation for them to utilize this. And that was really it. But the villains that stick on and last with readers are those that they can connect to in some way, even if it's in a strong dislike, but at least it's a way that they can connect to the villain. And then the villain story becomes much more dramatic. And then when they face off against the hero, the odds are a lot greater and you get more emotionally invested in the story when you care about both sides of it.
Right. And then it makes the issue intensify. I mean, like when I go back to what I said earlier about you kind of feel that emotional tug, and like this one here, when I'm not sure what page it is. Digitally, it's on page 14. But when Cyborg Superman, exhumes his wife's body and he's holding it, and then he just kind of rips it apart because he's pissed. He's just utterly just pissed.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, that's just an intense looking panel. And I like how Cyborg is drawn with the Sinestro Corps, the emblem on the front, and they got rid of his Superman emblem, which I thought was cool. Yeah, that was cool. And then he's got a fistful of power rings on each hand. And at the end of the issue, the Justice League comes into play, and he ends up fighting Superman. And, you take Cyborg Superman and you add the Sinestro power rings to it, makes him more of a threat. And there's this really neat thing at the end where he punches Superman, and Superman flies through the Statue of Liberty and knocks the Statue of Liberty's head off. And it ends with this really Planet of the Apes-esque image at the end of Cyborg Superman holding Superman over the head of the Statue of Liberty, which is on the ground, much like it was in the original Planet of the Apes film. That's funny that you mentioned that. I didn't pick up on that, but that's a really, really, really good comparison. It is kind of cool. Then, of course, it captions it off, "I will have my death." Yeah. And if anybody's a fan of Cyborg, he hasn't died yet. Thankfully, he's still around, and I hope he stays around forever. Yeah, he is really a neat character, and I agree. I think him versus Superman is almost one note-ish, because the only thing they have going for them is Hank Henshaw blames him for what happened, and that is a good strong motivation. But you can only write so many stories about that. And he's the good comparison to Superman. He's pretty much the exact opposite of what Superman stands for. Alter ego and all. And the cover of it was Van Sciver with Cyborg, and he's putting the glasses on and he's holding Superman. Probably one of the coolest covers that I've seen. And these Tales of the Sinestro Corps, back when the Sinestro Corps War was going on, were cool one-shots that added a lot of depth to the Sinestro Corps War in its entirety. This issue was one of those too where, back when Mongol and Cyborg Superman destroyed Coast City, it was, you're talking the 1990s and there wasn't a lot of graphic elements in books. So you kind of just saw like a mushroom cloud and assumed everybody's dead. And here there's a panel in particular where you see these storm clouds of radiation raining down, and you see people running through the streets in various states of being demolished and destroyed and obliterated. And so it's very graphic and very horrifying, which had they done that back during Emerald Twilight, it might have made that story a little bit stronger, because you almost had a disconnect as a reader. And this makes it much more powerful. I agree. I totally agree. And the colors really pop in this issue too. Yeah, it was really nice. It was a well done issue. Yeah. So that's my retro review. I strongly suggest anybody going out there and read it. And I'll add to the fact that if you pick up the Tales of the Sinestro Corps, do the Parallax #1 and the Superman Prime #1. Those are both good. Those are both good tie-ins as well. Yeah. All those books were really nice. It makes me want to go back and reread Sinestro Corps all over again. Well, and see, we should probably do an episode where we do the Sinestro Corps War. That'd be a long episode because that was a really, really good storyline. True. All right, well, everybody hanging with us tight for a few moments, and we're going to come back and we're going to jump back to 1964. Way back.
To tell you the story of Green Lantern is to tell you the story of the birth of a universe, the origins of DC as a whole.
It's a magic emerald meteor from space in the 1940s.
It's the establishment of the JSA.
It's the birth of the Silver Age.
It's the introduction of a universal police force.
It's the formation of the JLA.
It's the emergence of the multiverse.
It's a crisis in both space and time.
It's an emerald dawn.
And it's an emerald twilight.
It's the brightest day.
And the blackest night.
And the Lantern cast covers all of this and everything in between. We're Green Lantern's greatest advocates and fiercest critics. We've been fans for years, and it's the reason we're self-proclaimed Lanternologists.
So find us on iTunes and Stitcher and give us a listen. Because the history of Green Lantern really is the history of the DC Universe. And we've got the interviews, commentaries, reviews, and more to back it up.
Welcome back, everybody. And we're going to jump back to 1964. This book came out on June 3rd. So it's almost 55 years old, which is pretty old. It's as old as I am, so I don't want to comment too much about the age of the book. But
just for the record, it's 10 years before I was born.
you young whippersnapper. So
yeah, right. Yeah, right.
So Green Lantern number 29. This is it's interesting to go back to some of these Silver Age books. We were talking about, you made a comment during the Cyborg Superman book. You were talking about how the writing has improved, and I think if you look at this issue in particular, you can see how much better it's gotten over the years. And I don't mean that as a slam, because this is just your typical Silver Age wackiness, but it's written by two of the legendary creators in DC Comics and in all of comics, Gardner Fox and John Broome, with art by Gil Kane, which you can't get much better than that when you look at a Silver Age book.
No, definitely not. It's also worth mentioning that, this is back in the time when the Comics Code Authority was enforced, and a lot of the writing and a lot of the elements that existed in comic books that we see today didn't exist back then, because a lot of that stuff was suppressed.
True. And they would try to find ways to put some educational material in books. So what you would find, especially in the Flash and Green Lantern books, you'd find like they would use scientific facts, and then there'd be an asterisk, and it would give you a little bit of an explanation as to what it meant, which was a way to educate the audience and a way for them to say, hey, see, look, we're not just telling stories, and there's not just violence in these books for kids. There's some real value to it, and from an educational standpoint. But a lot of these stories are often quite wacky for the sake of sensationalism. And to give you an idea, when you look at this particular issue, and it's right on the cover too, you have Black Hand with this weird Etch-a-Sketch type looking device, and he's basically tried to send Hal Jordan to another dimension, but he's only gotten halfway there. Like, he can't summon the strength to turn the dial the rest of the way. And so the cover has a half of Hal Jordan. You've got just his right half, and somehow he's standing on that one leg. and the issue's title is "Half a Green Lantern is Better Than None."
It's so interesting, and the thing I don't like, I guess I can add a little bit of criticism, is the Black Hand's costume. I much prefer the updated version of it. But then again, this is the 1960s, so, I mean, things change and things look better as time goes on. At least that's what we're told. But in the case of comic books, the advancement of art and the advancement of a lot of these artists that do the work on these books has come a long, long way.
True. And what's the average size of a comic these days? What is it, 20 pages?
Yeah, just about 2024.
These were all 30 pages back then. In fact, these were books where back then you had almost every story was a single issue. And even in this issue, you'll find the main story. There's actually two stories in this one book. And the first story, the larger story, the Black Hand part of it, is actually broken into two parts. I mean, when's the last time you saw a book that wasn't an annual broken up into parts,
Right. Not to mention, when's the last time you saw a book that has a 12 cents cover price?
Right. And, the neat thing I do want to point out to people, if you're subscribing to DC Universe, both the book that we talked about in the Tales of the Sinestro Corps, that whole run is available on DC Universe, and so is this issue. So if you subscribe to DC Universe, you can read these books for the price of the subscription you're already paying. So, I encourage you to go back and look at them. But, this is back when Hal spent a lot of time on Earth. This is during the whole, he wants to date Carol, and Carol doesn't know he's Green Lantern yet, and so on and so forth. And you got Hal stopping some fur robbers, and there's this mysterious character who's following Hal around, and he's discovered that when Hal uses his ring, there's residual energy that's left behind. And this is where you kind of get into the bizarre pseudoscience and wacky, ideas and theories that you see in DC books and comic books in general back during the Silver Age in the 60s like this. But basically he's finding ways to take that energy and absorb it, and then he's going to turn around and he's going to use it on Green Lantern to get rid of him because he sees him as such a viable threat. And this guy has spent years being this version of William Hand, has spent years becoming a robber. And he basically this guy's a genius. He could make a living legitimately and make more money than he could as a crook because this guy has a perfect memory. He's written a book about how to get around any scenario he might encounter, and he's committed it to memory so that if he gets into trouble, he can instantly recall how to get out of the situation, which I find hysterically funny.
Yeah, it is.
And what's really unique about this book is you see there's a panel on the third page that's, I'm assuming, is supposed to be Gil Kane because they break the fourth wall. And so the artist addresses the audience talking about who this mysterious character is. And then you flip the page and William Hand, Bill Hand, addresses the audience as well and starts explaining. So he's monologuing to the reader, which is hysterically funny. But he's talking about how, he's come up with this book and how he's going to figure out how he's going to beat Hal by using the energy against him and set him into another dimension so he won't be a problem for him anymore. And then he talks about how he's come up with this costume, and he talks about his family, who is very well-to-do, and he is literally the black sheep of the family. And so he's trying to outdo his brothers by becoming a master criminal.
But keep in mind, he is the criminal who cannot fail.
Yes, exactly. He's the criminal he can't fail because he's got this book committed to memory. It's just a lot of fun. And there is the unfortunate trope of Hal calling Tom Kalmaku Pie Face. So right. For readers that are sensitive to that, be aware that's there. And I have to agree with you that they couldn't give Black Hand a full cape. He's got like an elbow length cape, a mini cape, and he's got thigh high black boots.
Kind of cheesy.
Yeah, and the Black Hand logo, like when they redesigned it for the modern age, they kind of gave it the 5 fingers at the top to look like a hand. This is just a triangle.
It is. Just a blank triangle, nonetheless.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, it's
he's all black and he's got this blank silver or whatever white triangle on his body.
Yeah.
But like you said, I like how they modernized it to go with more the Blackest Night thing, so it kind of correlates him with the undead. Yeah. Which I thought was really cool.
And so he does it. It's interesting, back then you would see a panel from the comics turned into the cover, and you have that here. There's almost an exact duplicate of the cover inside the book, but it's just comical to see half of Hal standing there with, he's standing on one leg. And he's like supposedly half in another dimension, but his left eye apparently can't see anything because he doesn't comment about where the other half of his body is.
No, he doesn't.
and apparently because of wherever he has sent Hal, he now has in his little device a half of Hal's power. So you've got a guy that's siphoning half of Hal's power, and I'm trying to figure out how that works because his ring hand is in our universe. So where's he getting half the power from? But I digress. But they continually get to a standstill because he only has half the power, and he's like, well, if I could just get 1 more %, I would have 51% of the power, and that would allow me to win. And Hal tricks him, which is it's the oddest thing. Hal tricks him because he figures out a way to look in a mirror, see his reflection, and then pull that reflection out of the mirror and attach it to his body so he looks whole again.
So where's the asterisk for the scientific explanation behind that one?
Well, yeah, right. Yeah, right. And there is some useful information, boys and girls. Did you know that you can use a penny to take the place of a fuse?
I don't think I've ever tried that. I have heard that before, but I don't think I've ever been bold enough to give it a try.
I think I'd find out the hard way that the power was working is what would happen to me.
Right.
But he kind of puts Black Hand off, gets him kind of caught off guard because he's got a full body again. And so then he captures him and he manages to get everything back again. And so the story ends. He basically captures the wand that Black Hand has and uses that to pull half of his body back again. Wacky fun. Picture yourself being a kid back in the day. But then there was another story in it, which this is where the scientific fact comes into play, by the way. But there was a creature in issue 24. They had the ability to kind of take over or possess other things, and he was controlling a planet. Well, he essentially, after he's defeated by Hal, he comes back to Earth. And, all right, now, this is going to take it a little far, but Hal is supposed to be there for the opening of the Coast City Fair. And there's a giant papier-mâché figure of Green Lantern outside of the fair, and Hal is supposed to show up and, with Carol Ferris, do a ribbon cutting. Well, this little creature takes over the giant papier-mâché Hal and goes rampaging through the park, knocking over a Ferris wheel.
Meanwhile, Hal Jordan is at the Justice League headquarters.
Yeah, he's got a meeting. He's trying to get out of the meeting so he can get out to the fair. But I didn't realize papier-mâché was bulletproof because the cops shoot it. The Coast City police shoot at the giant Hal, and the bullets just bounce off the papier-mâché. And he picks up the patrol car, crushes it.
Side note, that's called the Protonic Force, I think is what they called it, right?
Yes, you were correct. The Platonic Force.
Right.
Which I don't know if that's a real thing or not, but so this is during the days of Snapper Carr too. So Hal's in this meeting of the Justice League. Sorry. And he decides he's going to go take care of the giant papier-mâché Hal that's taking over the fair. And the Justice League goes like, well, let's go, everybody. And Hal's like, no. If this statue is a counterpart of me, I want first crack at it myself. So the Justice League are watching the coverage on TV as Hal flies to Coast City to fight this giant version of himself. And so you can just imagine, Flash is eating popcorn as they're watching this thing. But Hal ends up saving the day by creating an invisible tunnel to the center of the Earth to cause heat to come up into a chamber that the little protonic being has created a bubble around him and Hal. He somehow managed to take control of a topaz, which is yellow, and made a ring out of it. So it's this giant floating yellow ring, and he makes a barrier around Hal and him, and so Hal can't get out. So what Hal does is he makes this microscopic tunnel to the center of the Earth to force heat into the little bubble they're into. And I didn't know this, Phil, but did you know that if you heat up a topaz long enough and hot enough, it will turn pink?
I didn't know that, which is kind of funny how this one turned pink. I had to look that up, to be honest with you.
So once it's pink, Hal can affect it. He puts it in a little green bubble and takes it down to, freezes it to absolute zero. And that's your scientific fact of the day, kids. Editor's note, absolute zero minus 273.18 degrees Celsius is the temperature at which all molecular motion ceases. That's your...
And it traps the protonic force.
Yep. The more you know, right? And meanwhile, back at Justice League headquarters, they were all like, should we go help him? Oh, no, he's got it. And Snapper Carr's like, I knew it all along. You dare squares never give yourselves enough credit. And the issue ends with Hal and Carol walking through the park, Hal debating about whether or not he wants to throw us a ball at the milk bottles.
Right.
So, not necessarily the dark and disturbing origins of the Black Hand as we got during Blackest Night. That's for sure.
But there is a small caveat to this that I did learn. So Black Hand's his power stealing device with that invention that he came up with, that little rod.
Yep.
During the Green Lantern Secret Origin, Retcon shows it to have belonged to Atrocitus in the 5 inversions.
That is correct. And when he comes,
Right.
when Sinestro and Hal deal with Atrocitus in the cemetery, he loses that little cosmic rod, and Black Hand picks it up and starts using it. Oh,
Right.
Did you know that back then the Justice League did not have a headquarters?
Oh, they didn't?
No, it's the Justice League Clubhouse.
Well, that's interesting enough. I guess back then, all we had were clubhouses, and that's what we called it when we went inside of it. Actually, to be honest with you, there were tree houses and stuff when I was growing up. We didn't really refer to them as headquarters at the time.
Yeah, and I don't mean it to sound like I'm making fun of the issue, but when you go back and reread some of these as an adult now, boy, did they take on a completely different light. And they're still fun and enjoyable, but boy, you sit there and go, like you said earlier, boy, how far has the writing come?
Well, yeah. I mean, back in the 60s, it was just a tense time. And, I mean, granted, you fast forward to where we are now, and reflectively, the social atmosphere is just as tense, but in a different kind of facet, you know? So they take a lot of liberties nowadays. Back then, they couldn't take any liberties, you know? You had to have an enjoyable read for these kids because, quote unquote, the Comic Code Authority was in place, and everybody thought that comic books were gonna make juvenile delinquents out of everybody who read them. But they're comical to read because you're like, wow, okay, go back and read these things for the first time. Or, I mean, even if you're rereading them, you still have that same cringe effect. You're like, man, I can't believe how different things were back then and how the writing has just come so very, very far.
Well, you know, and you bring up a really good point about the environment of the times. Think about, this is 1964, so you're 1 year removed from the assassination of John F. Kennedy. You're not far removed from the Cuban Missile Crisis. You're still in the height of the Cold War. I don't know about you, Phil, but I remember growing up as a child in school in the late 60s, early 70s. We had air raid drills and so on. And bomb shelter drills and so on, because it was a very real perceived threat that we were going to get attacked and from above by the Soviet Union, I believe, was the big bad guys at the time. And so you can imagine for a lot of kids and a lot of that trauma, this was just pure escapism and nothing more.
Right. It detracts from the fear or the inherent fear of the Cold War. Like I remember a little bit of it in the early 80s when I was growing up, like going down to the bomb shelter when they didn't have raids and stuff, drills and everything when I was in grade school. But I do know that we had bomb shelter drills where we had to go downstairs and, you know, get underneath the table. Well, you know, unbeknownst at the time, nuclear technology was still in its infancy. So, I mean, it's not like crawling underneath the table. It's going to really, really help you from a nuclear blast. But at least they had good intentions.
Yeah. I know we used to have the air raid drills where we would go out into the hallway and line up and sit down and put your head between your knees. Like that was going to save you in some way, shape, or form.
Right. Right. Oh, how times have changed.
Exactly. So that's kind of a retro review, a look back at the classic origin. I don't know if the classic is really the right word, but the original origin of Black Hand. So we will take a quick pause. We'll come back in a few minutes, and we've got some listener feedback to share with you guys.
All right. Awesome.
What up, dweebs? This is Guy Gardner. You're listening to the podcast of OA.
All right. Well, Myron, here we go. Got some listener feedback again. And this one comes from a Mr. Brian R. And Brian says, I'm a first-time listener. I regularly listen to the Fire and Water Podcast Network, so I started listening to the annual JL May crossover. However, I wanted to start with part 1, not their part 3. So my digging led me to your page, which is good. We talked about that, how a lot of these podcasts with this crossover event we're having, how it gains a lot of new listeners going to and fro through these different events. Thank you for posting the other parts of this crossover chronologically. Myron, that's all you. Flipping through the rest of your page has me hooked as a longtime comics fan. And brightest day, I will be back. So there we go. I mean, we gained a new listener from this JLMA event.
Yeah, and Brian, thank you for listening to that episode and for jumping on board. And I'm glad you like the work that we've done, both on the podcast and on the blog itself. I'm glad to have you aboard, and I hope you stick around. Thank you for taking the time out. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for taking the time to listen. So the second piece of feedback we've got is via YouTube. When I upload the podcast, it automatically also posts to YouTube onto the Blog of O channel. So sometimes we get some feedback there. And this one is from JD Fennick. And he's commenting about the last episode we did where we were talking about Blackest Night movie. And so he said, in regards to that last comment that you discussed in the video, I have been thinking that after the success of Endgame, it would be amazing to see Blackest Night in place of Infinity War. Everyone dies, and then a year later have Brightest Day in place of Endgame, and everyone comes back. This would be assuming that DC would have success filling their universe. This would obviously require a simpler version of the stories, but the base idea would work. And JD, I agree. I think that's one of the hardest part about taking Blackest Night and trying to make it a live action film is part of what made that story so resonating to the people that read it was that we had longtime connections to the characters. So them dying and them playing off of their relationships had some real meaning. And because the DC film universe is not that well developed, how do you accomplish that? But yeah, I could see if they could find a way maybe to shorten the story down a little bit. They obviously, if you have well pointed out, it had to be scaled back a little bit.
We had to be scaled back a lot.
Yeah.
And also keep in mind, Endgame was a product of a decade-long storytelling. And, I mean, you pretty much have to do the same thing with Blackest Night. Well, no, you wouldn't have to do it that long. But you would definitely have to have some character development along the way with a lot of the sub-characters that are involved with Blackest Night.
Yeah, true. But it can be done. It can be done. I would love to see something like that. I just for the effects and visuals would be pretty amazing.
Oh, it would be stellar. All right, so the next one we have is Mr. Jason Ball. Jason Ball. I will try to hit the highlight as this is my first time connecting the Blog of OA. I've been listening to you guys for a little over 4 years, and Myron, Bill, and now Phil have been a pleasure to listen to over the years. I would personally like to thank Myron for what he's done for Green Lantern fandom, as he has inspired me to start a fan page as well for my favorite character, Lobo. All right, well, number one, that's awesome. Go Jason, because Lobo is a very, very cool character. And again, bravo to Myron for spearheading this Blog of OA. And, you started this whole thing, and Bill has been around for a long time, and, I'm just jumping on board, so I'm kind of the virgin to this whole thing. And, it's been a privilege to do it with you. I can't lie. I look forward to it every time. I look forward to hearing from you all the time, Myron, because, you and I have grown in friendship and we're states away from each other. And, while we've never met in person, I hope that one day you and I will. And I hope to continue doing the podcast with you. So he continues on, every time I get away from comics, I find myself coming back to the podcast of OA and reinvigorated in my passion for comics too. Lastly, before I go, I am thrilled the podcast is now on Google Play, as that is my app of choice of audio entertainment. I'm going back and listening to every episode from the start, and would like to list my top 4 lanterns that Myron and Bill asked the audience to list out from episode 4. So he goes on to number 1, Sinestro. Cullen Bunn turning him into a sympathetic villain won me over. I couldn't agree more. Cullen Bunn really, really did well with the Sinestro book. Number 2, Guy Gardner, classic egghead who reminds me a lot of Lobo. Also true. Kilowog, when he decided to sacrifice his life to hold off the Red Lantern Armada in the animated series, I became a huge fan. And on a side note to that, I don't think there's anybody out there who doesn't like Kilowog. I think everybody I've talked to that is familiar with that character really, really enjoys him, because I'll be honest with you, to me it always feels like Kilowog's got a big heart, Number 4, Hal Jordan. I don't know as much about him as the other characters, but I enjoyed his involvement with Lobo in the New 52. Well, all good points, Jason. Your thoughts, Myron?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for writing in. I do really appreciate it when anybody takes the time out of their day to contact us. And the fact that we've inspired you to do something with your favorite character makes me feel really great, because that's part of why I'm doing this. One is just, it's my love letter to Green Lantern, but if it inspires anybody to take their passion and do something creative with it, that's always really rewarding. And Jason, I would ask if you would send me a link to your fan page so that I can put it on the blog of OA under the friends of the blog. I'd love to do that to maybe help promote your site a little bit. And I agree so much with you about your characters. I think Lobo's neat. I don't know, Jason, if you're watching Krypton. I haven't caught the first season yet. The first season just showed up on the DC Universe app, but you're probably well aware that Lobo is in season 2 of Krypton.
So good. That's such a great series. It really is. They did well with that series. No, I was just going to say they've done well. Yeah, it's really done well.
I love the Lobo interactions with Green Lantern. I don't so much like during the Sinestro Rising, they had the new version of Lobo. I really am more of a big fan of the original version of Lobo, and some of the interactions that they've had with Green Lantern over the years that he has had has always been fun. I don't know if any of you caught the Justice League action episode that they did that had Lobo and Hal interacting with each other. That was a whole lot of fun. I try to remember there was a book that came out that had Lobo in it with Hal, and gosh, I can't remember what issue it was, but it was so much fun. There's just been a lot of neat interactions with it. It seemed it was in 1993. There was like a Legion crossover thing, and Lobo was in it, and that was it was a lot of fun. I enjoy Lobo. I love him particularly in the Superman animated series. He's hysterically fun.
He is. I like his motorcycle he rides around on.
Yeah. Lobo's a great character. It's funny because I always pictured Jason Momoa playing Lobo if they ever did a live action version. And of course, we've got him as Aquaman now, so I don't think there's any going back. I'm not sure who would play Lobo if they did a movie version of him. I know the TV version, as we just talked about with Krypton, there's a much thinner version of Lobo. He's much more normal size, whereas I picture somebody like Momoa who's big and muscle bound being Lobo. But I can just, I don't know. I love the character. I love the humor that he brings to the stories, and not in a cartoonish way, but just in the overtopness of the character.
The actor who's playing him in the Krypton series is Emmett Scanlon. That's the guy's name.
Ah, gotcha.
Do you remember? I wonder if Jason remembers this too. When they did that the Lobo book here recently. I guess it was just a couple of years back, and he was that thin version too. Remember, he was that. I don't know if you read it or not. I read a bunch of issues, and he was like, he didn't have a beard. He wasn't all disheveled looking. He wasn't all craggly looking, but he was this whole like modern, athletic looking, built, ripped Lobo. Do you remember that?
Yeah, that was the one we saw in Sinestro Rising, where he was killing off some of the other members of the other Lantern Corps.
Right. Okay. Which, I like the book, and I liked it because I liked Lobo, but it wasn't the original Lobo that I've grown to love. And his whole derogatory approach to every situation, and his mouthy, it kind of reminds you of a Deadpool of the DC universe,
Yeah, kind of. He's a character like, I could see him with Guy Gardner a lot. Just the two of them in a bar. It would write itself.
That'd be a good hangout. Throw in our Kilo and Kilowog, and boy, what a group that would be.
Yeah, really. That would be kind of neat. But thanks all three of you guys for sending us some feedback. I appreciate it. Love it when you guys take the time to reach out to us and share your thoughts and ideas and questions. I really appreciate it. And thanks for finding us on Google Play. I've tried to put this show on as many different media channels as I can find. I think right now we've got, Google Play, iHeartRadio, iTunes, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, and YouTube. So I've tried to hit about every medium I can to make this show as easy to find for people as I possibly can. So I appreciate you calling out Google Play. So Phil, I kind of like last time where we didn't pause and come back and do a closing. I think that's a good thing for us. So I think, this is a good time to wrap it up. I hope people have enjoyed this episode. We should be back in the beginning of June when we have the next issue of the Green Lantern book. It'll be issue number 8. This is going to be the big one where Hal meets up with Ollie. This is going to be their kind of the hard traveling heroes point due. So it should be a lot of fun.
Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So everybody, until next time, please keep your power rings charged, treat each other well, and make every day your brightest day.
All right. We'll see you guys soon.
The Podcast of OA is the official podcast of the blog of OA and a proud member of the Comics Podcast Network. Share your comments and questions by calling the show's voicemail line at 406-POD-OA. That's 406-763-6362. You can send your emails to podcast@blogofoa.com. You can also find the Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA on Twitter and Facebook. Green Lantern and other related characters are the copyrighted property of DC Comics Incorporated and are used without permission. The Blog of OA and the Podcast of OA are fan productions and do not claim any ownership over the Green Lantern or any other copyrighted properties.